What if the alien fleet that came to end us had no idea what we had been building for 60 years? 312 warships appeared above Earth in less than 1 second. No warning, no signal, no build-up. One moment, space above Earth was exactly what it had always been: silent, distant, and empty. And then, in the span of a single heartbeat, it wasn't. Not one object, not a meteor, not a satellite falling off course. A fleet. Massive, unimaginably, terrifyingly massive. Ships, hundreds of them, tore their way into existence just beyond the orbit of the moon. Not arriving the way human spacecraft did, slow and visible and humble. These ships dropped into reality as if space itself had been peeled open like a wound to let them through. One moment nothing was there. The next, they existed. Fully formed. Already in position. Already watching. For a fraction of a second, every telescope on Earth went blind. Every satellite glitched. Every deep space sensor overloaded, as if the universe itself flinched at what had just arrived. And then the data came back. And what it showed didn't make sense. The smallest of the objects was larger than anything humanity had ever built in orbit. The largest didn't even look like ships. They looked like moving continents. Dark, cold, covered in structures that could only be weapons. Weapons so enormous they made the word itself feel small. They didn't spread out. They didn't scan. They didn't hesitate. They formed a perfect formation, tight, controlled, deliberate. And then they stopped. Just stopped. Hanging there in silence above a world that had no idea this moment was coming. Watching. Across Earth, millions of people saw them at the same time. Through telescopes. Through live streams. Through emergency broadcasts that cut into every channel without explanation, without apology, without any preparation for what people were about to see. Cities went quiet in ways they never go quiet. Not the quiet of night, or of winter, or of a held breath before something beautiful. This was the quiet of 8 billion people realizing, all at once, that they were small. Air traffic halted mid-route. Military networks lit up with a level of urgency no one alive had ever witnessed before. Because there was one detail, one small, impossible detail, that made everything worse. The fleet hadn't arrived near Earth. It had arrived in position, perfectly placed, exactly where it would need to be, if it already knew everything about us. If it had studied us, mapped us, measured us, and decided exactly where to stand before we even knew it was coming. And somewhere, deep inside the global defense network, an automated system processed the incoming data, compared it against every known threat profile ever cataloged, and returned a result that had never appeared before in the history of the system. Classification: unknown civilization. Threat level: absolute. And then, before humanity could respond, before a single message could be sent, before anyone could even agree on what they were looking at, the fleet moved. Not toward Earth, but into formation, as if this wasn't an arrival. As if this was the beginning of something that had already been decided long before today. They did not introduce themselves immediately. They didn't need to. For the first 12 minutes after their arrival, the fleet said nothing. No signals, no movement, no visible activity at all. And somehow, that silence was worse than any threat could have been. Because threats can be answered. Silence just waits. On Earth, every major government activated emergency protocols within seconds of the sighting. Military satellites were redirected. Defense systems powered up for the first time outside of drills. Command centers filled with people who had trained for crisis their entire careers and were now discovering that training and reality are two very different rooms. In Washington, lights burned through the night in buildings that were never supposed to go dark. In Moscow, Strategic Command issued its highest alert level for the first time in decades, the kind of alert that made generals go pale. In Beijing, entire divisions were mobilized before anyone fully understood what they were mobilizing for, only that they needed to be ready, and they needed to be ready now. And in Geneva, deep beneath the city, in a reinforced facility built for scenarios no one wanted to imagine and everyone secretly feared, the United Earth Defense Council assembled. They had all seen the same data. They had all reached the same conclusion. And none of them wanted to say it out loud. Because the numbers didn't lie. They never did. The fleet consisted of 312 confirmed vessels, a number that updated every few seconds as sensors refined their readings, each update somehow making things worse. Each ship was larger than anything humanity had ever put into orbit. Each one carried energy signatures that didn't match any known propulsion system, any known weapon, any known physics. Each one radiated power levels that frankly defied easy explanation. Humanity had spent over a century developing space technology. They had satellites, stations, prototypes, experimental craft, a handful of military platforms designed for orbital defense, quietly funded, never publicly acknowledged. Nothing more. Nothing close to what floated above them now. The most advanced war-capable structure in Earth orbit, the Orbital Defense Platform Aegis, humanity's greatest achievement in military space engineering, was smaller than the smallest ship in the alien fleet. Not just weaker, smaller. And at this scale, size meant power in ways that couldn't be argued with. The scientists in Geneva ran projections. Over and over. They adjusted variables, changed assumptions, ran best-case scenarios that required increasingly generous interpretations of the data. Every simulation ended the same way. If those ships opened fire, Earth would not survive the hour. Not the day, not the war. The hour. No defense grid could stop that level of energy output. No missile system could reach targets moving at those speeds. No shield technology existed that could withstand even a fraction of what those ships were capable of delivering. One analyst, a quiet man named Dr. Pavel Orlov, who had spent his entire career studying theoretical extraterrestrial threats in a department most people thought was a waste of funding, summarized it in a single sentence that emptied the room of air. "We are not looking at an invasion," he said. He paused, then corrected himself. "We are looking at a conclusion." Nobody spoke after that, because everyone understood what he meant. This wasn't a battle. It wasn't even a contest. It was the end of a question humanity had been asking for thousands of years. Asking in radio waves and telescopes and hopeful mathematics and late nights looking up at stars and wondering, are we alone? The answer had arrived. With 312 warships. 12 minutes and 42 seconds after first contact, the silence ended. Every communication system on Earth activated at once. Not gradually, not selectively, all at once, as if something had simply decided the time for waiting was over. Phones lit up. Screens flickered. Broadcast signals were overridden globally. Every language, every network, every device capable of receiving a signal received the same message at the same moment. It wasn't scrambled. It wasn't distorted. It was perfectly, terrifyingly clear, as if it had been designed specifically to be understood by the creatures it was meant to end. A voice spoke, calm, measured, completely without emotion, the kind of voice that doesn't need emotion because it has never had cause to be afraid. People of Earth. Across the planet, billions of people froze, standing in kitchens, sitting in offices, kneeling in places of worship, all of them listening. You have been observed. No introduction, no explanation, just a statement of fact, delivered the way you'd read a number off a page. For a duration you would measure as 73 of your years. In Geneva, several heads snapped up. 73 years. That meant they had been watching before humanity had even reached space. Before the first satellite. Before the first orbit. They had been watching since before anyone here was born. You have reached a stage of development that requires correction. That word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Correction. Not contact. Not negotiation. Not even warning. Correction. You are confined to a single world. You possess no external colonies. You demonstrate internal division. Each sentence was precise, clinical, evaluative, like a report being read aloud by someone who had already decided what to do with the results. You are not prepared for what exists beyond your system. A pause, just long enough for the meaning to settle into every listener's chest like cold water. Therefore, you will not proceed further. No one moved in the command center beneath Geneva. No one breathed, because now they understood. This wasn't first contact. This wasn't the beginning of a relationship between civilizations. This was a judgment, already rendered, already decided, delivered by something that had never considered the possibility of being wrong. You will power down all off-world operations. You will cease all deep space development. You will remain within your planetary boundary. Another pause, shorter this time. Compliance ensures continued existence. And then, finally, the threat, laid out with the same calm tone, the same total absence of feeling. Non-compliance will result in removal. The transmission ended. Just like that. No countdown. No negotiation. No further explanation. As if the matter was already settled, and they were simply informing Earth of a decision it had no part in making. Across Earth, the silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence as before. Before, it had been uncertainty. Now it was understanding. Humanity had just been measured, weighed, evaluated, and found wanting. For 9 minutes after the message ended, no one spoke. Not in the streets. Not in the command centers. Not in the rooms where decisions were made by people paid to make them under pressure. It was as if the entire planet had paused, trying to process something too large to fit inside a single thought. Then the noise began. It started small. A voice on a news channel. A question no one could answer. Then another voice, and another. And within minutes, every network on Earth was broadcasting nonstop. Experts and analysts and officials who all disagreed on everything except one thing. This was real. Panic didn't come all at once. It spread, like a crack working its way through glass, quiet at first, and then suddenly everywhere. In New York, people filled the streets and stared upward at something they couldn't see without a screen, but could no longer ignore. In Tokyo, trains stopped mid-line as operators abandoned protocol to watch emergency broadcasts. In London, financial markets froze before collapsing into chaos that no algorithm had been designed to handle. Airports shut down. Military convoys moved. Hospitals activated overflow protocols for a disaster that hadn't happened yet, but felt seconds away. Because everyone understood something simple and something terrifying. If those ships decided to act, there would be no warning. There would simply be silence, and then nothing. Deep beneath Geneva, the United Earth Defense Council reconvened. And this time, there was no silence. Voices overlapped. Arguments collided. Fear sharpened every word into something sharper than it was meant to be. "We comply," said General Adiz Okafor, her voice tight and deliberate. "There is no alternative. You saw those projections." "They said removal," added Deputy Secretary Harlan Metz, his hands flat on the table as if he needed to feel something solid. "That means extinction. Total. Every human being alive." "And surrender is what, exactly?" said Director Cale Vasquez, leaning forward with controlled anger written into every line of his face. "Survival? Under what terms? For how long? We hand them control today, and then what? We wait for permission to exist. We don't know what they'll do," someone said. "Exactly," Vasquez replied. Screens around the room displayed the fleet. Still motionless. Still watching. 312 ships hanging in space with the patience of something that had done this before and knew exactly how it ended. "They've been observing us for 73 years, said Dr. Orloff quietly, staring at his hands. "That means they know everything. Our capabilities. Our weaknesses. Our divisions," said Okafor. That landed harder than anything else in the room. Because it was true. Humanity wasn't unified. Not really. Different nations, different interests, different definitions of survival. And now those differences were being weighed by something that could erase them all in an hour. Secretary General Amara Diallo had been listening. She sat at the head of the table, and she had not said a word since she walked in. She was in her 60s, with the kind of stillness that comes from spending a lifetime in rooms where the wrong word could start a war. Now she cut through the room with 4 words. "They didn't give us a deadline." Everyone turned to her. "That doesn't mean we don't have one," she continued, gesturing toward the main display. "They arrived in perfect formation. Pre-calculated positions. They've been studying us for decades. They know how long we take to respond. They know how we argue. They know what fear looks like in a species like ours." A pause. The room held its breath. "They're not waiting for us to decide," she said. "They're waiting to see what we are." That changed something in the room. Because suddenly this wasn't just about survival. It was about judgment, and unlike the aliens' judgment, this one hadn't been rendered yet. The Secretary General listened to every argument, every fear, every attempt to find certainty in something that offered none. She didn't interrupt. Not once. And then, when the room had exhausted itself, she asked a single question that stopped every voice cold. "How accurate do we think their assessment is?" Confusion. "They've been watching us for 73 years, she continued slowly. "They believe we are confined, divided, limited, contained to one world with no capacity to resist." She looked around the room. "Are they right?" No one answered immediately. Because the answer was complicated. On the surface? Yes. Humanity looked exactly like what the message described. One planet, no colonies, constant internal conflict, a civilization that could barely agree on what to have for breakfast, let alone how to respond to 312 warships. But that wasn't the whole picture. It had never been the whole picture. Director Marcus Chun of Strategic Intelligence cleared his throat from the far end of the table. He was a man who chose his words carefully under normal circumstances. Right now, every word felt like it might change the world. "They're right about what we show," he said. The room stilled. "Show," someone repeated. He nodded once. "They've been watching our visible infrastructure, our public programs, our official capabilities, the things we built where anyone with a telescope could see them." He paused. "They've been watching what we let them see." The silence that followed was different. Not fear. Something else. Something that hadn't been in the room a moment ago. Something that felt, unexpectedly, like the first breath of hope. "They believe we are contained," the Secretary General said slowly. "They believe we are predictable." She looked at Chun. "They believe we are finished." Another pause. Longer this time. "Show me what they missed." Director Chun didn't announce what he was doing. He didn't prepare anyone for what was coming. He simply reached forward and unlocked a file, one that had existed for decades beneath so many layers of classification that most of the people in that room had never seen it, had never been cleared to see it, had spent their entire careers in this building without knowing it existed. The main screen flickered. For a second it went dark. Then new data appeared. Not simulations. Not projections. Real footage. The angle was wrong for Earth-based observation. Too clean. Too stable. Too precise. A scientist whispered it before anyone else could. "This isn't from Earth." No, it wasn't. The feed was coming from the far side of the moon. For most of human history, the far side of the moon had been exactly that. Out of sight, out of reach, the one face a tidally locked world never showed. Even in the age of satellites and constant surveillance and photographs of every inch of the solar system, it remained one of the few places in near-Earth space where direct observation was limited. That had been useful. Deliberately, carefully, precisely useful. The image sharpened, and the room changed. Because the surface of the moon wasn't empty. It hadn't been for a very long time. Structures stretched across the lunar horizon. Not one structure. Not a research outpost. Not a modest base with a flag and a few labs and hopeful scientists measuring moon dust. An industrial complex. Massive and layered and alive with movement in the dim light of space. Rows of construction erased the size of city blocks. Docking arms that made skyscrapers look modest. Energy grids glowing faintly beneath the surface, threaded through the rock like veins. And ships. Hundreds of them. Not like the alien vessels. Not the same scale. Not the same age. Smaller. Sleeker. Darker. Purpose-built rather than ancient. But unmistakably, undeniably, inescapably, warships. The footage shifted. Zoomed out. Kept zooming until it revealed something that made two people in the room instinctively put their hands over their mouths. This wasn't a single facility. It was one of many. "They've been watching us for 73 years, Director Chin said quietly, and there was something in his voice now that hadn't been there before. Not pride, exactly. Something older than pride. Something more earned. They started watching when we were barely leaving the atmosphere. They tracked our satellites, our stations, our public programs. They built their entire model of us around what they could observe." He let that sit. They assumed that was everything. The screen changed again. New locations. New angles. Asteroid belt installations. Entire processing facilities embedded in rock and shadow. Invisible to outside observation. Construction platforms hidden in the darkness between worlds. Outer system relay stations that had never appeared on any civilian map, had never been mentioned in any public report, had existed quietly and patiently in the dark for decades. Each one building, expanding, producing. They were looking at what we were doing, Chin continued. They never thought to ask what we were preparing for. The Secretary General stood slowly. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, on the scope of it, on the scale of what her species had managed to build in secret, in darkness, in patience. "How long?" someone asked, barely above a whisper. Chin didn't hesitate. 58 years. That number hit harder than anything the aliens had said. 58 years. That meant humanity hadn't started preparing when the fleet arrived. Hadn't started when the message came. Had started long, long before they knew who the enemy would be. Only that something would come eventually, and that when it did, they intended to be ready. Why? A diplomat asked, his voice barely holding. Chen looked at him. Because we looked at the sky, he said simply. And we didn't assume it was empty. The live footage returned to the moon facility. Closer now. A line of ships, finished, armed, powered, sat in silent formation along the surface. Patient. Waiting. Each one a product of decades of work by people who would never see this moment. How many? General Okafor asked. In this facility alone? Chen replied. A beat. 243. The room went completely still. And this is one of 9 confirmed sites, he added. Then stopped. Corrected himself. 9 visible sites. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Because the math had just changed. The entire calculation had changed. 312 alien ships against. What? Secretary General Diallo turned from the screen. Her voice was calm. Impossibly calm for a woman who had just watched the shape of the world rearrange itself. They think we have nothing, she said. They think we're confined. They came here believing this was a correction. She looked at the ships on the screen. At humanity's quiet answer to a question the aliens had never thought to ask. Send it to them. Not a message. Not words. The image. Let them see what they missed. There was no debate. No argument. The live feed was packaged, encrypted, and broadcast directly to the alien fleet. Not as a threat. Not as words. Just as a fact. Shipyards. Warships. Scale. 58 years of work in the dark. Sent to 312 ships that had arrived expecting a species that didn't know how to fight back. Aboard the alien lead vessel, the transmission was received instantly. Analyzed. Decoded. Displayed on every screen with the clinical efficiency of a civilization that had done this hundreds of times before. At first, there was no reaction. Because what they were seeing didn't match anything in their records. A species classified as contained, primitive, non-threatening, was showing them something that should not exist. Ships, not prototypes, not experimental frames. Operational warships, in numbers that didn't fit any model, built in locations that weren't in any surveillance file, produced over a timeline that upended every assumption the Empire had made. A junior officer spoke carefully into the silence. Commander, this does not align with surveillance data. Nobody responded immediately, because the implication was dangerous. If the data was wrong about this, about the most fundamental fact they had come here with, then everything built on that data was wrong. Above Earth, the fleet held formation. But something had changed. The silence no longer felt like patience. It felt like the first flicker of doubt. The alien fleet did not respond immediately. For 6 minutes and 14 seconds after receiving the transmission, they said nothing, did nothing, changed nothing. And yet, if you knew where to look, you could see it. Small adjustments, subtle realignments, energy fluctuations across multiple ships, changes too precise to be random, too small to be tactical. They were recalculating. On the alien Central Command vessel, a figure stood at the observation span. Commander Selvareth had commanded campaigns that ended civilizations, had overseen corrections on 47 worlds, had never, in 3 decades of service, encountered a species that required revision of the pre-engagement model. Assessment, he said. Officers moved. Data streams updated. Models that had been built over 73 years of surveillance began, for the first time, to contradict themselves. Human military capability, previously classified as negligible, one officer reported. Reclassification required. Another voice. The number of vessels in the transmission does not match total expected output for a civilization at their technological level. Silence. Conclusion? Selvareth asked. A longer pause than any officer should take when responding to their commander. Our data is incomplete. That was the first real problem. Because for a civilization that had mapped thousands of species and ended hundreds of threats before they became threats, incomplete data wasn't just an operational failure. It was a heresy. Incomplete data meant the model was wrong. And if the model was wrong, then this, the fleet, the position, the certainty, was built on nothing. They are attempting to project strength, another officer said. Confident, measured, certain, a bluff. Possibly, the first replied quietly. But if it is not, nobody finished that sentence. Selvarith looked at the image of humanity's shipyards for a long moment. They will be given demonstration, he said. Move the fleet. Orders moved through the fleet like electricity. Precise. Controlled. The formation shifted, not breaking, not scattering, but advancing. 312 ships moving as one toward a world that had just told them it was more than it appeared. Near the orbit of Mars, humanity's first defensive fleet was already waiting. They had moved during the silence. Quietly. Efficiently. Not announced. Not broadcast. Just positioned, like a thought that had already been thought before the moment required it. 180 ships. Smaller than the alien vessels. Lighter. Nothing like the massive, ancient weight of the fleet bearing down on them. But they didn't look fragile. They looked sharp. On the lead human vessel, a woman sat in the command chair with the specific stillness of someone who had been waiting for this moment for so long that the moment itself felt almost ordinary. Commander Yara Shun was 44 years old. She had been 12 when her father, a defense architect, sat her down and told her that her life's work was already decided. Not by him, not by her, by the sky, by the simple, quiet certainty that something was out there and that when it came, someone needed to be ready. She had trained for this, not in theory, not as a possibility, as an inevitability. Behind her, her crew moved. No panic, no hesitation, no speeches, just motion, the way a body moves when muscle memory takes over from thought. Range, she asked. Closing. 8 minutes to engagement. Relative strength? A pause. They outmass us by a factor of 12. She nodded. Once. Slowly. Remember your training, she said. Her voice wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. Every person on that ship had heard her say this before. In simulators. In drills. In the long, quiet hours between exercises when the weight of what they were preparing for settled on them like a second gravity. Don't fight their battle. Fight ours. The distance collapsed. Alien targeting systems locked first. Clean, precise, perfect. The product of centuries of warfare against species that fought in straight lines and expected their enemy to do the same. Human ships responded differently. At the exact moment engagement range was reached, in the instant before the first alien weapon fired, the human fleet disappeared. Not literally, but functionally. The formation, the readable, predictable, manageable defensive line, vanished. 1 second, 180 ships were arranged in a pattern a tactical system could analyze. The next, they were moving in 180 different directions. Up, down, sideways, through angles that existed between the categories, through approaches that fell into no established threat model. No pattern, no symmetry. Alien weapons fired and missed. Not completely, but enough. Accuracy dropped from near perfect to something unstable, unreliable, fighting against movement that didn't follow rules. Adjust tracking, an alien officer snapped. We are. It's not stabilizing. Human ships didn't just evade. They behaved in ways that defied expectation at every scale. Sharp turns that contradicted expected inertia. Sudden bursts of acceleration followed by decelerations into angles that made no tactical sense. Until the moment they did. Pairs crossed each other's paths mid-flight. Groups split and reformed in configurations that couldn't be predicted because they weren't based on theory. They were based on 10,000 years of human beings fighting each other in every environment, under every condition, with every possible advantage removed. A group of 6 ships broke from whatever passed for formation and converged on a single alien vessel. Not head-on. From 3 separate angles, precisely timed. They fired, then scattered before the response could track them. Too fast. Too unpredictable. Too human. The alien ship took the hits. Systems flickered. Stabilized. Then failed. It didn't explode dramatically. It just stopped. Lights fading. Power collapsing. Drifting. Dead. On the alien command vessel, silence. Because this didn't happen. Not like this. Not this early in an engagement. Not against a species classified as non-threatening. The battle continued. More attacks. More of the same pattern. No central push. No unified front. Just small independent engagements creating temporary advantages, exploiting gaps, disappearing before retaliation could form. Every time the alien fleet tried to regroup, the humans forced them to spread out again. Every time they tried to concentrate fire, the targets were already somewhere else. They're controlling the engagement space, an alien officer said slowly. Selvareth said nothing, because he could see it. A smaller fleet, outmassed 12-1, was choosing where and how this fight happened, was deciding the terms of its own survival. Human ships were hit. Some were destroyed. One, then two, then more. They weren't invincible. They weren't untouchable. But every loss bought time, created openings, shifted the shape of the battle in ways that made the next move possible. After 43 minutes, the numbers stood at 11 alien vessels confirmed destroyed, 7 human vessels gone. The numbers didn't matter in themselves. What mattered was what they represented. For the first time in the history of the Empire's expansion, a species classified as non-threatening had engaged a correction fleet and come out ahead, had not just survived, but shaped the fight. And for the first time, there was doubt on the command vessel. Real doubt. The kind that doesn't ask whether you'll win. The kind that asks whether you understood the situation at all. But the alien commander was not a creature of doubt. He was a creature of results. And adaptive response, Selvareth said. Reform into strike configuration. His officers hesitated. Strike configuration was not used for engagements like this. It was used to end them, to apply overwhelming force with total disregard for the cost, to convert a battle into a conclusion through sheer, undeniable weight. Orders spread through the fleet instantly. The scattered formations tightened. Ships repositioned. The alien fleet changed shape, not defensive anymore. Not reactive. Offensive. In the way that something vast and ancient is offensive when it finally stops being patient. When they fired again, it was different. Focused. Multiple ships locking onto single targets. Overwhelming force applied in precise windows. Human ships that had survived dozens of near misses were suddenly caught. Hit. Destroyed. 3 ships gone in under a minute. Then 5 more. On the human flagship, Yara watched the shift happen in real time. They've adapted, her tactical officer said. No, Yara replied quietly. They've stopped adapting. They're not trying to understand us anymore. They're simplifying the fight. They're going to brute force it. And brute force worked. Not elegantly. Not efficiently. But it worked. Because no matter how unpredictable human movement was, raw power still mattered. And the alien fleet had more of it than any force humanity had ever faced. The battlefield began to shift. Slowly. Then faster. Human ships were still landing hits. Still creating openings. But the cost was rising with every passing minute. Every maneuver came with a higher risk. Every attack had a higher price. They're compressing us, a systems officer said. They were. The wide, chaotic battlefield was shrinking, not by accident, but by design. The alien fleet wasn't trying to win the engagement anymore. It was trying to push humanity's ships back toward Earth. They don't need to win this fight, Yara said. They just need to push us back toward Earth. And then, she didn't finish. She didn't need to, because the sensors had already found it. One of the largest alien vessels, positioned at the rear of the fleet, the kind of ship that didn't move unless it was ready to end something, had begun to power a system that wasn't a weapon for ships. The energy buildup exceeded every standard threshold. It exceeded the next threshold after that. And the next. Confirmed target vector, Yara said, her voice flat and careful. Tracking, adjusting. A pause that lasted exactly long enough to feel like a held breath. Earth. It wasn't aimed at the fleet. It wasn't responding to the battle. It was a message delivered in the language of annihilation, comply, or watch your world die. Yara looked at the tactical display for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds where she held everything. The weight of what she was about to ask, the names behind the ships she was about to send, the knowledge that some of them would not come back. Then she opened a channel to every ship in the fleet. Phase 2, she said. All volunteers. Go. She had not asked for volunteers. She hadn't needed to. Every crew on every ship in the strike group had been chosen years ago, had trained for this specific moment, had known when they took the assignment that one day she might say these words. 30 ships broke away from the main fleet. Clean. Fast. Focused. Their course locked on the weapon, not on the fleet, not on any tactical objective. On the alien command vessel, weapons redirected instantly. Tracking systems locked. The sky filled with fire. Some ships didn't make it. Call sign Ardent, gone. Call sign Meridian, silent. Others. The list would grow before this was over. But the rest kept going. Straight through the fire. Straight towards something that could end the world. On the alien command vessel, an officer spoke quietly. "Commander, they are not retreating." Selvarith watched the trajectory. Watched the ships accelerate through fire rather than away from it. "They are not trying to survive," he said softly. "No," another officer replied. "They are trying to reach something. And they are willing to pay the price," Selvarith finished. For the first time in 47 corrections, the commander of the Imperial fleet felt something unfamiliar. The remaining ships of the strike group came in from multiple vectors simultaneously, above, below, across angles the alien defense grid hadn't fully recalibrated for. They didn't slow. They fired at point-blank range. The first volley struck the outer armor. The ship held. Of course it did. The second volley hit different angles, different timing, not targeting armor, but systems. Energy conduits, shield nodes, thermal vents. The places where power moved, not where it was stored. The third volley came before the second had finished dispersing. And then something changed. On every display, the massive vessel flickered. Just for a second. Just long enough for every officer on both sides of the battle to see it happen. "They're not trying to overpower it," an alien officer said slowly, disbelieving. "They're unraveling it." Because that's exactly what it was. Not brute force. Precision. Each strike calculated. Each hit part of a sequence that had been designed years ago in a room somewhere on Earth by people who had studied alien engineering from a distance and asked the question no one was supposed to ask. How do you kill something bigger than you? Not by being stronger, by knowing where the seams are. The fourth volley landed while the weapon systems were still cycling. A fraction of a second delay. That was all it took. Something inside the vessel failed. Then something else. The energy signature spiked wildly, unstably, like a held breath that had been held too long. Containment failure. Someone whispered on the alien bridge. "Pull it back." The ship didn't explode like a weapon. It collapsed like a star. A sudden, violent release of energy contained for too long, let go all at once. Light flooded the battlefield, blinding, white, absolute. Every sensor washed out. Every display went white. Every ship, human and alien, was reduced to a shadow against something too bright to look at. Then darkness. Silence. Empty space where the weapon had been. Of the 30 ships that had made the run, 19 were gone. No signals. No escape pods. Just absence. On the human flagship, no one cheered. No one spoke. Yara looked at the tactical display. At the empty space where the weapon had been. At the list of call signs that no longer responded. Names she knew, voices she'd trained alongside. People who had made a choice before the battle started. She held that for 3 seconds. Then, continue engagement. Not because it was easy, because it was necessary. And they would carry the weight of those names later, when there was time. Across the alien fleet, something changed that couldn't be quantified in tactical data. A species classified as contained had just destroyed a capital-class weapon. Had done it deliberately, methodically, without recklessness, accepting loss as part of the calculation. "Commander," an officer said carefully, "we may need to revise threat classification." Selvarith stared at the empty space where the weapon had been, at the cost it had taken, at the species that had paid that cost without hesitation. "Revise all classifications," he said. The remaining human fleet didn't retreat, didn't regroup defensively, moved forward, not aggressively, not recklessly, but with the confidence of a force that had just proven something to itself. The battle continued. Ships hit on both sides. Losses accumulating. The alien fleet adapting again, trying to stabilize, trying to reassert the overwhelming advantage that the math still said they had. But math had been failing them all day. And then, just as both sides prepared for what came next, just as the battlefield reached a new and terrible balance, it happened. Far beyond the battlefield. Past Mars. Past the outer planets. Past anything any sensor had been focused on during the hours of this fight. Space opened. Not in one place. Everywhere. Human sensors picked up the faster-than-light signatures first. Then alien sensors. Then every ship on both sides of the engagement simultaneously. Multiple FTL exits detected. A pause. Correction, hundreds. Where, someone asked. All vectors. Above the plane. Below it. From the outer dark. From deep space. From directions no fleet should be able to approach from simultaneously. From positions that implied coordination, implied planning. implied that someone had placed ships in those positions days or weeks ago and told them to wait. Lights appeared across the system. 1, 10, 50, hundreds, then more. Ships dropping into existence not in formation but in waves, surrounding, closing, filling the space around the alien fleet like a hand closing around something it intends to hold. The count stabilized. Updated. Stabilized again. 3,200 vessels. Then 4,800, as Allied ship signals appeared alongside humanity's own. Dozens. Then hundreds. Ships of different design, different origin, different civilizations that had been watching the Empire from a distance and waiting for a moment exactly like this one. On the alien command vessel, no one spoke. Because suddenly everything made sense. The hidden facilities. The incomplete surveillance data. The unpredictable tactics. The willingness to take losses without breaking. The way every engagement had been shaped around buying time rather than winning outright. This wasn't humanity's defense. This was a trap. And 312 ships had walked directly into it. The alien fleet, every vessel that had arrived with absolute certainty this morning, was surrounded. Not partially. Not developing. Completely. Every escape vector covered. Every trajectory predicted. 4,800 ships holding position around 312. A transmission request appeared on the command display. Human origin. Direct channel. Selvarith looked at it for a long moment. Then accepted. Yarushin appeared on screen. Calm. Focused. Unhurried. You've repositioned effectively, the alien commander said. Not mocking. Not hostile. Acknowledging, the way a warrior acknowledges skill. You advanced exactly as we predicted, Yara replied. No triumph in her voice. No performance. Just certainty. The earlier engagement, he said slowly. It was not intended to win. No. It was intended to hold you in place. Silence on both ends of the channel. How long, he asked. How long were you planning this? 60 years, she said. That landed harder than anything else in the conversation. 60 years. This wasn't reaction. Wasn't improvisation. Wasn't desperation assembled in the hours since the fleet appeared. You knew we were coming, he said. We knew something would come, she replied. We didn't know who. We didn't know when. We just knew that the universe is too large to be empty and too indifferent to be kind. A pause. So we decided we wouldn't be surprised. The alien commander looked at the tactical display. 4,800 ships. Positioned. Controlled. I will not surrender without a fight, he said. I know, Yara replied. The channel closed. What followed was not balanced. Was not uncertain. Was not a contest between equals fighting for the same outcome. It was systematic. Human and allied fleets operated in layers. The outer ring contained. The middle ring disrupted. The inner ring struck with precision, choosing targets that degraded capability rather than simply destroying mass. Ships that tried to break through were intercepted, not chased, not reacted to, but predicted and stopped before they reached open space. Some tried to run toward the outer system. They didn't make it. Groups formed defensive clusters, tried to rebuild structure, tried to turn the surrounding fleet into something they could push against. It didn't matter, because every formation was already understood. Every maneuver had been modeled. Every response had been prepared for by people who had spent 60 years thinking about this exact situation in every possible variation. One by one, then in groups, then in waves, the alien ships fell. Not dramatically, not with fire and spectacle, with the quiet inevitability of something that had been decided long before today. On the command vessel, Selvarith stood in the center of his bridge as systems failed around him. Shields collapsed. Weapons went offline. Boarding alerts triggered on decks throughout the ship. He did not resist, did not flee. He watched. Human soldiers entered the bridge with efficiency and discipline, weapons raised but not fired, moving with the control of people who had been told exactly what they were there to do and were doing it without excess. You are secured, one of them said. You will not be harmed. Selvarith looked at them, at their discipline, at the restraint in how they moved, how they held their weapons, the way they looked at him without hatred. He had conquered 47 worlds. He knew how conquerors behaved. These were not behaving like conquerors. The battle ended in under 3 hours from first contact. Wreckage drifted across the system. Fires faded in the vacuum. Signals went silent one by one. 4,800 ships held position. Unbroken. Untouched. Earth still turned. Unchanged. Alive. Unbroken. This wasn't just a victory. It was a message, clear, undeniable, written in the silence of a fleet that had arrived with absolute certainty and been answered by 60 years of quiet preparation. The war ended quietly. Not with celebration. Not with noise. With work. Across the solar system, recovery ships moved through the debris. Human crews. Allied crews. Searching for survivors. For signals. For anything left alive in the silence after the fighting stopped. They did not discriminate. Human. Alien. Alive was alive, and alive meant brought in. On Earth, there was no victory speech. No declaration of dominance. No announcement of conquest. Because that had never been the objective. Deep beneath Geneva, in the same room that had once argued about surrender, Secretary General Diallo stood before her council for the last time that day. They'll expect terms, one official said. They'll expect us to become what they were. Diallo shook her head. We didn't build all of this, she said. And she gestured not at the ships, not at the tactical displays, but at the room itself, at the people in it, at 60 years of patience and preparation and choice, to become another empire. The transmission that followed was not a demand, not a warning. It was simple, clear, deliberate. We will not kneel, but we will not make you kneel either. The species you have taken, the worlds you have controlled, and the civilizations you have corrected will be free. We are willing to talk. The message spread across what remained of the alien fleet, across their networks, across their civilization, carried on signals that moved faster than light toward an empire that was about to discover it was no longer unopposed. It took time. Negotiations always do. Understanding takes longer still. But slowly, things changed. Allied fleets returned home. Freed worlds began to rebuild. Old systems were rewritten. Not perfectly, not without conflict, not without setback, but undeniably, irreversibly differently. On the edge of the solar system, Commander Yaroshin stood at the observation deck of her ship and looked out at the stars. The same stars she had trained under, fought under, survived under. The same stars her father had pointed to when she was 12 years old and told her that her life's work had already been decided. Behind her, life continued. Orders and repairs and voices and the ordinary sounds of a ship doing what ships do when the fighting is over. Her console chimed. Priority signal. Deep range origin. She opened it. Read it once. Then again. The message was short because the distance was too great for anything else. Unidentified structures detected. Estimated age, over 40,000 years. Origin, beyond known space. Observation signals confirmed. Yara stood very still for a moment. 40,000 years. Older than the alien empire. Older than any civilization humanity had encountered. Old enough to have been watching when humanity's ancestors were still learning to make fire. Old enough to have seen everything that had ever happened in this corner of the galaxy. And whatever it was, it had seen today. She looked out at the stars again. Not the same way as before. Because now they felt different. Larger. Not empty. Full. Full of something ancient and patient and watching. The way the universe itself watches, without judgment and without mercy and without any particular interest in what you expect it to do next. She opened a channel back to Earth. Recommendation? The voice on the other end asked. She didn't hesitate. Send scouts. Go toward it. A pause. And let them watch. The channel closed. Yara stood there a little longer, looking out into something vast and ancient and waiting. And for the first time since the morning when 312 ships had appeared in the sky and told humanity it was finished, she allowed herself a small thought. Not fear, not doubt, curiosity, because whatever was out there had just learned something about humanity, had watched them fight and win and stop, had watched them refuse to become the thing they had defeated, had watched 60 years of preparation pay off in 3 hours of fire. And humanity. This species that looked at the sky and didn't assume it was empty, that built in secret and waited in patience and chose restraint at the moment of victory, was only just getting started.